Yesterday, the world witnessed what can only be described as a diplomatic mugging, and the press conference in the White House, which turned into the high stakes confrontation between President Donald Trump, the Ukrainian President Zelensky, and the Vice President J.D. Vance. What should have been a formal discussion over critical minerals deal instead unravelled into a television spectacle of political brinkmanship. And it was Caleb Robertson who cut through the noise for me, stating the glaringly obvious: Trump and Vance are too afraid to set foot in Ukraine during the conflict. They're both cowards. That indeed says it all, doesn't it? So easy to see a coward behaving as a bully, and that's exactly what we saw yesterday. From the moment Zelensky walked into the Oval Office, it was clear that he was walking into a setup. Vance and Trump position themselves not as allies of Ukraine, but as interrogators with a gathering of specially selected reporters, including the TASS news agency, and yet not the people who support the Democratic Party and so on. And Zelensky was ridiculed for having supported the Democrats by Vance. This is madness. The refrain, gratitude. Why doesn't he show us enough gratitude? There are videos of him showing so much gratitude. Trump, with all the subtlety of a debt collector, repeatedly demanded to know if Zelensky had thanked America enough for its support. Vance, for his part, played the classic schoolyard instigator, prodding and goading while his principal stood over the beleaguered Ukrainian leader. In my experience, whenever there is bullying in the playground, there is also bullying in the staff room, and this was a really good example. This wasn't a conversation that went off the rails. It was orchestrated. It was Trump and Vance deliberately cornering Zelensky, forcing him into acquiescence or public humiliation. And the key moment came when Trump threatened, make a deal with Putin or we're out. And this was a direct ultimatum that left no room for negotiation. And it's not surprising that Zelensky then left. Apparently, he was told to leave. While Trump positioned himself as the ultimate deal maker, what was evident that this was no negotiation, it was a performance. And Trump isn't a deal maker, he's a thug. The world watched as Zelensky, arguably the most embattled leader in Europe, stood firm under pressure. If he's not going to flinch under the threat of Putin's missiles, he's hardly going to flinch under the threat of some old fart in an orange wig. His composure, despite the relentless attack, only bolstered his standing back home. Meanwhile, the implications of this moment are reverberating across NATO, across Europe. European leaders already uneasy about Trump's isolationist tendencies now face a stark reality. There's a photograph, I'll put it here, of the Turkish president sheltering Zelensky under an umbrella. This is where Zelensky finds shelter, in this continent. And the reaction has been immediate. Macron, Scholz, and even the usually reticent Swedish government, all reaffirming unwavering support for Ukraine, and the Turkish minister, who's on his way to Lancaster House tomorrow, has already said that any peace deal is not about surrendering land to Putin. In Moscow, however, the mood has been jubilant. Russian state media gleefully reporting on the exchange, calling it evidence that the West is fracturing. What now? For Zelensky, the immediate future is uncertain. His Washington trip was meant to secure further aid and strengthen Ukraine's diplomatic standing. Instead, he's left the White House empty-handed, and Trump's message has been clear. Ukraine can either negotiate with Putin or on Trump's terms, or risk losing US support entirely. For Trump, the gamble is whether this will play well with the American electorate. His base will see a leader who prioritizes America first, refuses to be played by a foreign leader, and it gives him an excuse for not being able to fulfill his promise, his rash promise that he was going to bring peace to Ukraine in one day. It gives him an excuse. Not my fault, the orange Trump says. It's the fault of Zelensky. But this was set up. For moderates and foreign policy hawks, the scene of an American president berating an ally mid-war may be too hard to stomach. The contrast with Keir Starmer's carefully managed meeting with Trump the day before is striking, but it now places Starmer in an uncomfortable position. People have been saying, "Oh, look, let's salute Starmer, and this is the way you'd get something out of Trump." And then the following day, Trump produces this baggage, and you have to say, how do we deal with this man? Why would we deal with this man? Why would we deal with a thug? Why? Because what's the difference between Trump and Putin? Starmer played the role of a statesman while Trump and Vance engaged in a spectacle of political humiliation. I suppose we can say that. Caleb Robertson, have a look at what he says here.
And when he was declining the offer to evacuate from Kyiv during the invasion, when he said, "No, I need ammo instead," that proved him as a true world leader. And that is what pisses off people like Trump and bullies like J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance and Trump, by the way, who are too scared to come to Ukraine, too terrified. They admit this in a conference today.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
They said that they didn't want to come here, and they don't want to come here because it's actually real what is happening in Ukraine. And they're cowards.
I think he's absolutely right to highlight the cowardice of Trump and Vance in refusing to set foot in Ukraine. It's easy to dictate terms behind the resolute desk. It's far harder to stand in the rubble of a war zone. If they truly believed in their demands for peace, they would go to Kyiv, they would look Zelensky and the Ukrainian people in the eye and make their case there. Indeed, the only way to repair this damage is for them to go to Kyiv. It's not Zelensky who needs to apologize here. It's the thugs in the Oval Office. Indeed, we saw the very worst kind of diplomacy, one rooted in intimidation and grandstanding. This moment will be remembered not as a turning point for US-Ukraine relations, but as a defining snapshot of Trump's foreign policy, of Trump's true nature. Whether it was an act of strategic genius or reckless abandonment of allies remains to be seen. Maybe it will spear the European continent into action. But one thing is certain. Zelensky may have been humiliated in Washington, but he leaves with his dignity intact. And the same cannot be said for the so-called leaders of the free world. I will find it very difficult myself to take Trump seriously in future. And already there are petitions calling on the king to withdraw his invitation for a second state visit to Trump to the UK.